Let's make sure we understand something about yesterday's coup attempt. It was not going to be successful, that wasn't the point. The point was this was supposed to be a political show of force. You see, Trump simply took advantage of what was already there. There's a lot of whole white supremacists out there who call themselves ordinary, real Americans, and they've been wanting for the longest time to show that if they could, they would try to overthrow the government. Now, a real government overthrow would be impossible without the military, and that's the reason why no matter how many racist cops and sheriff's deputies, and indeed, as we saw yesterday, Capitol Police, federal officers that you got, without the military, no coup attempt is going to be successful. This is not to downplay the importance of what happened. I don't give any points off for these half-assed coup plotters simply because they were too stupid and too idiotic to understand that it wouldn't work. It's not like I give them any credit for that. But the point that I'm trying to make is, in other countries, what you see is that coups absolutely require the involvement of the military because you're at some point going to need to be able to show that you've got a preponderance of force on your side. Now, in the United States, the military is never going to be part of any sort of coup, at least not the way that it's currently constituted. And the reason why is the military's culture is very different than it is in other countries. Don't believe it? The last time that there was an attempt to plot a coup to overthrow the government was in the 1930s. I told you about it. Smedley Butler, who at that time was, and I think probably still is, the most decorated soldier the United States ever produced, General Smedley Butler was contacted in what has come to be known as either the business plot or, as they called it back then, fascist plot, to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt's government. Smedley Butler detailed how he was approached by a representative who was representing some very powerful Wall Street interests, some of the most powerful corporations in America, and they told him that they would give him $50 million to raise an army of 500,000 men in order to go and depose President Roosevelt. That means to throw Roosevelt out of office. They show up with the guns and say, "We're taking over. We got enough men under arms where we can do it." And because General Butler was so respected by the military, they felt it was just a cinch that he could pull it off. Well, what they didn't realize was Smedley Butler. There's a reason why generals had, ever since the Civil War at least, generals had never tried to overthrow the government. That's because it's drilled into them that whole loyalty thing is part and parcel of your honor. So Smedley Butler went and tattled instead, and the coup fell apart. But it says a lot that President Roosevelt was helpless to prosecute the men who tried to overthrow the U.S. government. That's the last time something like this was tried. So trying to get the U.S. military to take part in overthrowing the government, that's just not feasible. Now, on the other hand, if you're somebody like, say, Eric Prince, who's the head of the paramilitary company formerly known as Blackwater, and you got a whole bunch of ex-special forces on your payroll, well, those private military corporations, that's a different story. But I'm talking about the U.S. military, not some group of pistoleros who answer to a bankroll. So what I'm going to do now is to follow up on last evening's video essay. Why did this happen? You know, they say that the devil's greatest trick was to convince the world that he didn't exist. Well, this is exactly what white supremacy has attempted to do time and time again. And especially in the last 40 years, it seemed like their ruse might have worked, but reality, that is black empowerment, always has the last word. White supremacy is a lie and has perpetuated itself through the endless aggressive employment of lies. And those lies are how it deceives the world into allowing it to exist. White supremacy has convinced the world that it happens to be on the right track. Why? White supremacy has created the most progressive, forward-moving nations in the world. Yeah, if you don't look at the people being oppressed and abused and downtrodden. If you ignore the governments that it overthrows and the dictatorships that it brings to power. Sure, white supremacy is great if you just ignore all of its evil. But that's how white supremacy operates. It tries to cover itself with a razor-thin coat of legitimacy. Sure, there's nothing but rust and decay underneath that shiny coat, but that's what white supremacy does. It points at the shiny coat and says, "Look at that, please don't ask what the smell is." White supremacy understands that it is an absolute requisite to try to cover itself with some form of legitimacy for whatever it is it tries to do. That's part of the reason why, for the last few hundred years, white supremacy tries to intellectualize its anti-black racism, tries to heap some pseudo-scientific words on top of it, to make it seem like, oh, this isn't just garden variety baseless evil. This is in fact science, don't you know? And before that, this isn't just garden variety evil. This is the word of God, don't you know? And as for what was happening in the Capitol yesterday, this isn't garden variety white supremacy making a grasp for power. Why, these are conscientious citizens who are simply trying to obey and uphold the law. The times may change, but the lies and the liars remain the same. You had hundreds of white supremacist allies in the DC Metro Police and the Capitol Hill Police on the scene yesterday. And out of those hundreds of white supremacist collaborators, you notice that only one actually used his weapon, and he was fully justified, by the way. So what that tells you is, with a raving mob of white supremacist lunatics overrunning the very seat of government itself, out of hundreds of guys with guns, only one of them feared for his life. Which of course tells you everything you need to know about the lie that, well, we gotta shoot these black people because I feared for my life. Yesterday, you had hundreds of useless eaters with guns on the Capitol, and apparently only one of them feared for his life. So what does that tell you? That whole canard about feared for my life, that's a lie. They know that it's a lie, and they prove to the world that it's a lie. But what they also understand is, well, neither of the major parties are going to punish them. Neither of the major parties are going to be fielding candidates that are going to punish them. Nobody's going to make punishing the police into a plank of their political platform. Well, not unless somebody puts the arm on them. Now, you've had a few questions in the white media about what went wrong with the Capitol Hill Police yesterday, and the answer is nothing. Nothing went wrong. When the Bush administration released that 2006 Department of Justice memo that said that white supremacists had thoroughly infiltrated all levels of law enforcement, even though they didn't mention the federal law enforcement agencies, we all know that they're included too. The white supremacists have infiltrated not just your small little podunk sheriff's office. They're in the Capitol Hill Police, the FBI, U.S. Marshal Service, Secret Service, whole 9 yards. That's why. You were seeing a coup not just by a bunch of hayseeds and rubes and uneducated meth heads who gathered on the mall. You also had a number of white supremacists who have been lurking in law enforcement for the longest time, just waiting for an opportunity to help try to overthrow the government and try to usher in their glorious white ethno-state. The Capitol Hill Police are already doing what I told you yesterday. They're denying everything and saying, well, we gotta investigate. Yeah, where have we heard that before? Police agencies saying, well, we have to investigate what happened. And the Capitol Hill Police are going to be allowed to investigate themselves? Gee, I wonder what the outcome will be. The video has already been posted everywhere, so there's no need to repeat it here, but we saw with our own eyes what happened. The police in Washington yesterday were working hand in hand with the terrorists. They were fellow collaborators in this terrorist act. These white supremacists certainly couldn't operate without police cooperation and participation. What's happening here is a nation, a people, who are in deep, deep denial. And this denial has been encouraged, enabled, and glorified by a racist white media who indulges these deplorables in their racist delusions. The white media has armed a certain demographic in this country with all manner of lies in order to try to protect their anti-black racism, garbage about so-called reverse racism, phony victim narratives, railing against political correctness. That means that you get to check a white supremacist whenever they do something that is disparaging towards black people. All of these things the white media tries to say, well, aren't we just being overly sensitive? No, not at all. If anything, we're not being sensitive enough. This anti-black racism is taught in the homes. For the 250 years before the establishment of the U.S. government, There was the lie that everything was perfect because black people were in their place and white supremacy could profit off of us for absolute free. Then, after the U.S. was established as a nation, the lie was told that everything was still fine. Well, that is until 1861, when it wasn't for a few years. America's cardinal sin is lying. Ever since 1865, this nation's dominant society has pushed the lie that everything's fine now. That's the go-to lie that this country has always used, that things weren't as bad as they were during slavery. Of course, never mind that during slavery, this nation said, well, everything's perfect, and if you niggers have any objections to it, well, you're better off in chains than you would have been in Africa. Now, when the civil rights movement exposed that nothing had changed in this nation and everything was not just fine, there were clearly a few insincere bits of cosmetic legislation that got passed just for the sake of optics, in order to prop up the line that, since all of this evil, sick, anti-black racism is spilled over where the whole world can see it, we gotta do something big and flashy to convince the world, we're dealing with it, we're handling it, we're dealing with it. Oh, we didn't know that all this racism was out there, we had no clue, but now that it's been brought to our attention, we're going to pass some laws and everything is fine now. In fact, it's better now because we have at long last faced the evil of racism. We even admitted to it, kinda, sorta, and we passed some laws and now we are better than ever because now you can't accuse us of having not faced up to it, why we even wrote some laws. For 150 years, this nation has tried to convince the rest of the world that it was different, better. But as we saw with the dismantling of Reconstruction, with the subsequent genocides that occurred when white supremacists went on rampages and destroyed the Black Wall Streets across the country, as we saw with the race riots of the early 20th century and the savage white supremacist attacks on civil rights activists, no matter what the political leaders of this country said, no matter what the white media said, this nation's dominant society was clearly teaching their children the exact opposite of what black people were teaching theirs. No matter what empty public rhetoric the dominant society may have been spouting, they made it very clear what they were teaching in their homes. I'm a Gen Xer, and that's significant because mine is the first generation of Americans born after the civil rights era. We were supposed to be the first generation of Americans who would be colorblind, post-racial, whatever ridiculous label you want to give that the white media put out there. It was a lie, and the dominant society expected us to play along. But what happened was, as Gen Xers got older, we started looking and going, nah, we see through this scam here, and you're going to have to start living up to this crap that you're showing us on TV. Sure, we may have been raised by TV, but sooner or later we had to go out into the big, bad, real world. And we saw that, it wasn't just our imaginations what we saw in elementary school and growing up into high school. And we could see that even then about the teenage years, like Neely Fuller said, about those teenage years, that's when our white schoolmates started making it very clear that they understood exactly what the racial division was and they were taking sides. We saw exactly what the reality was. This country's propaganda arm, the white media, has invented the fairy tale where things didn't get bad for race relations in America until Emmett Till was murdered. And then it all came to an end when Dr. King was assassinated. Somehow that was considered to be like the bookends for racial strife in America in the 20th century. Starts with Emmett Till and it ended with Dr. King, and well, the bad guys were not punished or overthrown and the good guys were not empowered. But after that, the country just kind of got tired of racism, or rather the white media thought it would give itself permission to get tired of talking about it. And after the assassination of Dr. King, well, it's been a post-racial wonderland ever since. The white media's perverted reimagining of history is a lie where racism died with Dr. King, and the country's been living the dream ever since. They don't mention the murder of Fred Hampton that took place after the killing of Dr. King. The first modern white supremacist race killer was Bernie Goetz in New York, who shot 4 black teenagers intentionally after he claimed one of them asked him for money. And by the way, this attempted murder on his part, attempted mass murder, that made him a hero in the white media. Nobody talks about the firebombing of Move in Philadelphia, the Willie Horton race hysteria, the Central Park Five, the Rodney King beating, the O.J. trial, the St. Petersburg riots in 1996. That occurred after a white cop murdered a black unarmed motorist. James Byrd, who was dragged to death by white supremacists in 1998. In 2006, the Bush administration Department of Justice wrote the memo telling us what we all knew, that law enforcement is thoroughly infested with white supremacists. From the lowliest patrolmen to the police chiefs to the sheriffs to the DAs and the judges. 2009, a white supremacist went to the U.S. Holocaust Museum in D.C. and killed a black guard. The white media claimed that the motive was anti-Semitism and nothing else, but what they conveniently leave out is that the terrorist, James Winokur von Brunn, had been in and out of prison for decades. And in his personal notebook, he blamed one of his convictions in the 1980s on a Negro jury. The FBI said he had a website where he declared his hatred for black people and Jews. I'm going to stop my recitation there because I think the point is made. You have bootlicks for the white media pushing the lie that everything was hunky-dory until that mean old orange man got elected president. And nothing could be further from the truth. See, the thing about having a blatant white supremacist in the White House is, sure, he galvanizes the white supremacists, but he also makes it where everybody else can no longer just sit there and pretend as if everything is everything. You can't just go, well, there's always been a few loudmouths and a few unpleasant people, and this is just background noise, just par for the course. Nah, you weren't going to be able to ignore this one. You'd actually have to get up and do something about it, and that's what people resented. And by the way, that also includes people in power. Business prefers when things are not quite so exciting outside. Business hates uncertainty, by the way. The problem that they had got with Donald Trump is Trump was a strong dose of truth serum for a white supremacist racist country that wanted to express just how much it hates us. He simply gave them permission to do what they had been waiting to do all along. Now, a lot of us are scared of these white supremacists because we don't want to believe that the people that we see on television, people who we work with, who we live next to, or who in some cases you might be sleeping with, that they actually hate black people. Black folks are terrified of having to face up to that possible reality. We just want to go on pretending that racism is some aberration. We want to pretend that, well, we got some people in the white media telling us this, and they kind of sound sincere when they say it. Why I'd like to believe that racism is an aberration, and they're saying it is, and they seem so sincere with it. I'm going to go along with it. It may not be true, but it's better than the horrifying truth. We're looking for any excuse to hit the snooze button. And white supremacy knows this. So they're giving you the chance to do just that. And if you're angry with Donald Trump for his blatant racism, why are you not equally angry with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for theirs? Joe Biden spent 35 years in the U.S. Senate, and every day of it was spent attacking black people through legislation, and 8 years in the White House defending that legislation. Kamala Harris spent 25 years using the laws that Joe Biden wrote in order to attack black people. You have both of these clowns who have weaponized the law against us. And you got some black folks telling themselves, well, you're going to get something different with Joe Biden. Sure, you get a slightly more courteous barbarian, but that's all you get. The racism that Donald Trump has galvanized did not start with him. What that means is it won't go away with him. That's the reality, folks. You're going to have to fight white supremacy, like it or not, and clearly a lot of black folks don't like that idea. And you got some folks who want to pretend that, oh, we came so close to the government falling. No, you didn't. Get off it. Stop it. Just because you got a bunch of white supremacists who assembled with the will to do it doesn't mean that there was a way. Big difference. That doesn't mean that it's okay, but what it does mean is black folks need to admit that the real thing that they're scared of is that basically this kind of white supremacist fervor isn't limited to just a half-baked attempt to vandalize the Capitol building. They're concerned about where the world they live because black people are not fighting white supremacy. Not all of us, not enough of us. You see, it's easy to get a full head of steam about the orange man because this guy is a blithering buffoon and he makes an easy target of himself. But you know, he's not the real threat. The real threat are the people who pretend to be nice and sympathetic toward you, like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, like a lot of those people you see on television, like Joe Scarborough. After Tamir Rice was murdered, you had Joe Scarborough and especially his current bop, Mika the Bigot Brzezinski, who made a real show out of their disdain for the idea that Tamir Rice was an innocent child killed. Joe Scarborough himself said, well, he removed the orange tip from that toy gun he had, and he and Mika Brzezinski were saying that mess right up until the video came out that showed they shot him the moment they showed up. Tamir Rice never had the opportunity for anyone to even see that toy gun. They opened fire as soon as they got there. Then Joe Scarborough dropped that talking point. But when Mika Brzezinski was asked about it, I'll never forget, she's rolling her eyes and going out of her way to show how incredulous she is about the whole matter. A child was murdered, and she went out of her way to show how, as far as she was concerned, it was just ridiculous that they were even talking about it. See, these are the people who happen to run and operate the white media that you listen to. These are the real threats. You can see Donald Trump. When he shows up, you don't have any illusions about who he is, what he stands for, and you better be on your guard. When Donald Trump shows up, you know exactly what to expect. You're not going to be making any deals with this man, and if you try, you'll be looking and going, nah, I got to keep both eyes on you, and you better keep your hands where I can see them. That's how you deal with Trump. And you know what? The truth of the matter is, I'm telling you, he's no different than Biden and Harris. He's no different than these white media mouthpieces that you listen to or their black bootlicks. Black people are looking for an opportunity to not have to fight white supremacy. And they're thinking if they just vote the right way, somebody else will do the heavy lifting for them. And I'm telling you, that's not going to happen. Because while Biden's writing laws meant to target black people and put a $13 billion bounty on our heads, while Kamala Harris was locking black people up wholesale, neither one of them was doing a damn thing about the police who killed black people like Matrice Richardson, like Oscar Grant. Oh, Kamala Harris wanted to weaponize the law to go after black mothers if their kids skipped school, but she wasn't about to use the law to go after killer cops who were murdering black people. That she wasn't going to do. She said that's a local matter and needs to be handled by them. Okay, well, what about kids skipping school? That's a statewide matter, you see. It leads directly to more crime, and we've got to get involved. All of a sudden, that wasn't a local matter for the local school board. All of a sudden, the state had to get involved. Because she wanted to show those Biden Republicans, or in her case, Kamala Republicans, she wanted to show those cash fluid white suburban types, hey, see, my name is attached to locking up black people. I'm cracking down on black people. I want my name to be associated with that so that I can gain a lot of traction with those white voters who I'm hoping are going to vote for me. Because after all, who do you think put her on low-down Willie Brown's thought list? Oh, but it's okay to do nothing about that. It's okay to have we can just go ahead and make excuses for him, right? Let me tell you something. What happened yesterday was people were being honest. They were being honest about their intentions. And what black people have shown is that if a white supremacist is merely pretending to be polite to us, we'll let him slit our throats. Trump made it where you could no longer stay in your make-believe world about racism. You couldn't pretend that Bill Clinton was going to do something or Barack Obama was going to do something or that these guys were not openly operating and collaborating with the white supremacists. Black people were terrified that we're actually going to have to build our economic standing, which means you can't goof off and be an eternal child under white supremacy anymore. You're going to have to start taking on the responsibility that power demands, and that means no more goofing off full time. And a lot of black folks don't like that idea. That's why so many black people hate Trump. He reminds them that they've been living a lie. Oh, while you're busy chasing interracial sex, or you're busy trying to pretend as if you're going to get that 50-year-old rap career off the ground, or whatever other delusions that, we're going to pretend like white supremacy ain't so big a problem. Trump's showing you, yeah, it's a big problem, and you don't have an answer for it, do you? That's what bothers you. That's what you hate about it. Trump reminds you that you may have decided that you're tired of white supremacy, but white supremacy ain't tired of you. You may have decided that you don't have the ability to fight white supremacy, but white supremacy is showing it has the ability and the desire to fight you, and that you have not taken out the time to make sure you have an answer to white supremacy's aggression. That's the problem that a lot of black folks have. That's what scares them and bothers them about what's all going on. That's what terrifies them. They have not taken out the time to make sure that they have an answer to white supremacy's aggression. Because you see, the thing about it is white supremacy does not necessarily have the ability to wipe us out unless we decide to sit on our hands and let them. These white supremacists are a lot of things, but brave isn't one of them. They had to be given complete and thorough cover by law enforcement to pull this crap. But if you actually had some down to the ground brothers there who made it very clear, the same way that you got stopped in other cities around America, you're going to get stopped here too. I don't give a dang how many meth heads they had out there. Those guys would have been turned back. Now, I taught you that fear and anger are flip sides of the same coin. When black people get mad about Donald Trump, the question is, what are they afraid of? What they're afraid of is the racist reality that he represents. We are unprepared to fight white supremacy, not because we lack the resources, but because we lack the will and the focus. And Donald Trump's reminding you that you're going to have to deal with this sooner or later. And we're looking and going, man, he wants it to be sooner rather than later, and they've caught us unprepared. Yeah, you're right, they have. White supremacy, this threat to our existence, is not going to go away on its own. We are going to have to crush it out of existence, but too many of us don't want to. We bought into the white media's pleasant propaganda of the last 50 years. We've taken refuge inside of a dream world created for us by our oppressors and determined to stay there if we can, but Trump, he gave black folks in denial the wake-up call from hell. And a lot of us are having trouble going back to sleep again, and this is good. You were disturbed by just how many people from the dominant society supported Trump. That's what bothered you. You couldn't believe that so many of them agree with Trump. See, you were in denial about where a lot of your neighbors and co-workers and probably your bedfellows, where they stood on the issue of black people. You were confused, but they weren't. Your pals from the dominant society, they're not going to like it when you begin tearing down white supremacy because they need it. And you know they need it. But your desire to be liked by the oppressor class is more important than being free. Trump reminds you that white supremacy is still here, and it's getting bolder. It may not necessarily be getting stronger, but it's certainly becoming more belligerent. And you will either have to fight white supremacy or it will destroy you. Black people are ridiculously oversampled when it comes to entertainment. We watch way too much movies and way too much television. This is white supremacy's opiate for the masses. It's part of how they put your brain to sleep. They show you all sorts of pleasant images, stories that are meant to mimic the sophistication and complexity of real life, but to lead you to false conclusions. That's why long-form dramatic storytelling on cable, that's a dangerous thing for black people to decide that we're going to be binge watching. Because when you watch this stuff, especially for extended periods of time, whether you realize it or not, you're undergoing a form of programming. That's the white media's job. Through TV shows, movies, and tons of white media output, the lie has been pumped out to the world like so much Nazi propaganda that the U.S. had changed and had plenty of black folks out there. Oh, we're going to have some black people on these TV shows. And hey, the kiddies' textbooks at school, there's going to be some black-looking characters in there too. See, the all-white textbooks are gone, and this means things are different now, and we better get some black folks out there to say, yep, things are certainly different now. There were some black mayors, a few black faces in high places, but all of those black faces beholden to the same white power. The white media was the apparatus that white supremacy used to invent the lie out of whole cloth that the 60s was some sort of aberration. Oh, that whole deal with the murder of Emmett Till and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. I mean, the white supremacists targeting black children. That's their standard operating procedure. Firebombing the civil rights activist buses, the so-called Freedom Riders buses, the killings of Medgar Evers and Malcolm and Dr. King and such. Well, these were all just one long aberration. Just a series of ugly incidents where some uneducated good old boys down south who have poor manners kind of got out of hand for a little while. Oh, but don't worry, we got them under control. Why? It was J. Edgar Hoover who they claimed came and restored order. Restore order? In order to restore order, there had to have been order beforehand, and the South and North have never had order. They simply had periods where black people had not had enough traction in order to make sure that our voices were heard. And that's what they really mean. You Negroes are making enough noise now where people can hear you. We got to get you guys to either go back to being apathetic or find a way to beat you back into submission. That's what they mean by order. We got to get back to order. Back to black people suffering in silence is what they mean. And that's how this country has always tried to cover up its anti-black racism, as some sort of anomaly, when in fact it is the status quo. Last 4 years, we've had the white media, especially with the Democrats, having some dumb Negro or another, usually somebody like an Al Sharpton or a Stacey Abrams, claiming we got to get Trump out of the White House so we can get back to normal. Well, normal is black people oppressed. Normal is black people suffering in silence. Normal is black people being incarcerated at a rate 4 times everyone else. Normal is black people being killed at a rate by the police 10 times everyone else. That's normal. The only thing Trump did was he was boastful about it. So as far as they're concerned, black people can be oppressed, locked up, murdered with impunity, just so long as you don't have a president who's sticking out his chest and saying, God bless America, it's killing and imprisoning all the niggers. That's what Al Sharpton and Stacey Abrams consider to be back to normal, which means go back to pretending as if the white supremacists are not firmly in control of not just the government, but also of the society and the culture of this sick, twisted, perverted cesspool of a nation. That's what back to normal means. We need to go back to the white supremacists operating with impunity and no one opposing them. When it comes to the treatment of black people in this country, there has never been a time when we were treated justly. It makes me sick when some scumbag, especially a black person, calls themselves saying we got to get back to normal. That's the same old denialist white liberal talk. That's the same old deflectionary talking points that white liberals like to use. Anytime some fool tries to tell you that America's record on race was better before Trump, ask them when. Ask them to tell you the specific year. When was this mythical era in the United States history when black people were not being murdered, enslaved, brutalized, deprived of our rights, deprived of any opportunity for economic wherewithal with complete impunity? When was it that black people were not being given the short end of the stick? When were we not being oppressed? At what point in this country's history? When did this make-believe time in the country's history exist? When was this? You ask them that. Anytime somebody tries to tell you things were better before Trump, like when? When did black people get a fair shake in this country? What time were black people not being oppressed and brutalized? When? Obviously, these idiots think that they're talking about the post-civil rights era. That's usually what they refer to, or at least that's what they think they're referring to. But as the black media has taught you, anti-black racism has been alive, well, and attacking us nonstop. That's why I gave you that litany of all those crimes against black people ever since the assassination of Dr. King. It's never stopped. There has never been a period in this country's history when black people have not been at the point of a gun, and the gun being held by white supremacy. The murders of black people that you've been seeing the last 8 years or so are not new. It's only been the advent of personal cell phone cameras that have made it where everyone is a walking security camera now. The only difference is you can actually see it because people have the ability to video it. And because of the fact that they can go on the internet and post it, which means that the white media, who now is pretending as if they're so shocked, I tell you, about the racism of Donald Trump, when Scarborough and Brzezinski are not cheerleading for it, or when Rachel Maddow is not trying to ignore it. These are the same individuals who prior to now wouldn't even post anything like that. But now people have the ability to circumvent them, to go around them and get it to the masses anyway. And the white media has been playing catch up. First, they tried to justify the murders. Now, when the public outrage spilled into the streets and became irresistible, now they're trying to get on the right side of the public and say, well, maybe the cops do a little bit of overreach. Maybe, sometimes, maybe. But they're selling a con. The lie that, well, ever since the end of the 60s, well, starting in the 70s, black people were being brought into the Voting Rights Act and such, and why there were more black people in television, but black people were getting hired in some of these companies. You name any era in this country's history that you want, and it's a bad era for black people. And a few athletes, singers, and actors doesn't change that. But black people have chosen to try to live vicariously through the success of a hand-picked handful of other black folks. We try to live through athletes, singers, actors, and a few hand-picked politicians. Well, there's no way that you can have vicarious freedom. You cannot have power vicariously. Either you got it or you don't. So in the coming days and weeks, you better expect there to be a lot of posturing and token grandstanding. But there will also be more empty promises of investigations. What went wrong? When the truth is, nobody's going to have the guts to say, you know what? The police are collaborators and partners and help to perpetrate these white supremacist terrorist acts. And what happened yesterday was not something going wrong. That was the white supremacists who had something go right. That's exactly what was supposed to happen because the police are part and parcel of the white supremacist terrorist groups. And the most powerful politicians on the planet are going to tell us that there's nothing they can do. Well, you see, there's nothing that they can do about it, you see. There's nothing that they can do. The law doesn't apply, you see. Oh, it's a very high bar, you see. Words that they never use when talking about black people. All of a sudden, the bar's never too high to lock up a black person. The only thing that matters is punishment. If any of these mealy-mouthed political whores on Capitol Hill or any of these feculent mouthpieces in the white media are not talking about punishment, then they can shut the hell up. You want to stop this white supremacist terrorism, then you have to punish it. Any conversation about these white supremacist terrorists that does not involve directly talking about how many decades they're going to get in prison, that is an illegitimate conversation. Because what they're really trying to do is they're trying to set the stage for trying to give themselves permission to stop talking about it. Oh, once Trump is gone, well, no matter what happens, there might be a few dead-enders who don't realize that Trump's out of office, but we got everything under control now. In other words, we're going to give ourselves permission to stop talking about this. But immunity from law, that's the devil's bargain that white supremacy made with those who it classifies as white. One of the tangible benefits that white supremacy confers on its beneficiaries. So you won't be hearing too much about punishment. Oh, they'll act like there were some arrests and such, and what they're going to do at most with these so-called arrests, because there were something on the order of, 50,000 people who were there, however many tens of thousands of people that it was, because the numbers are surely exaggerated. But what's not exaggerated is that there was at least 1,000 people who overran the Capitol. That's not exaggerated. So why are we not hearing about hundreds of arrests? Instead, what's going to happen is exactly what happened in 2008 after the housing crash. They're simply going to use the exact same playbook. They will have one or two high-profile arrests. That way they give you something that you can remember, a memorandum of sorts. Oh, let's give them the name of some guy so they'll have a face. We'll sit there and say, oh, there were dozens of arrests, and we're going to give you the name of some white guy you never heard of. And we're going to tell you a story so that you can remember it. And that way in the future, when you think about this little incident, you'll say the only thing you'll remember is that the white media told you that there were dozens of arrests and they told you about one or two guys. That's a trick that they like to use. Now, what they're not going to be doing is pointing out how many of the dozens of arrests also resulted in dozens of years apiece in prison. That they won't be talking about, and that's wrong. That's how you know that they're just covering it up. Oh, there'll be one or two arrests for the cameras. But as I explained in my White on White crime series, the predictable pattern will play itself out where the authorities will announce to the public, hey, here's some lukewarm charges we're going to put on these guys, a few years, and they're going to brag as if, oh, we're being really harsh, see, we're zero tolerance for sedition, you see, when in fact they're doing very little. But after they give the announcement of their charges, then when the cameras are gone, these same prosecutors are going to be reducing the charges or throwing them out altogether. As they do in every other instance, they will make sure that whatever punishment black people get is always going to be harsher than what some white seditionist gets. This is an article of faith for white supremacy. If you're white, you get off light. In response to the largely ceremonial gains of the civil rights movement, both the political left and right entered into a partnership to weaponize the law against us. So all 50 states, Democrat and Republican alike, passed laws to make it where if you were convicted of a felony, you couldn't vote in that state. Jim Crow by the side door. And then they all began a jihad of arresting black people, writing laws to criminalize anything a black person may do, and always a felony. That's the point. The point is, if a black person gets accused of a crime, whether they did it or not, make sure you put a felony on them. That takes them off the voter rolls, which means they don't have the ability to actually influence who's in political office. But more importantly than that, this makes it where hopefully they are going to be irrelevant to changing the society. They have two sets of laws in place, one for black people and one for the white supremacists. If you're black, it's rape. If you're white, it's sexual misconduct. If you're black, it's first-degree murder. If you're white, it's homicide. At most. This is why they were so determined to stuff every police department, sheriff's department, and prosecutor's office with white supremacists, because that's where the rubber meets the road. This wasn't some coincidence that this happened. There was a program at work. One pushed by wealthy white supremacists like Joseph Coors. I told you about him. He was the founder of the so-called Heritage Foundation and a rabid anti-black white supremacist. They put together so-called think tanks, whose job is to get a bunch of former academics to use pseudo-intellectual language in order to try to intellectualize all of their justification for all this anti-black racism and policies. Their job is to say, we've got numbers and we've got facts and figures, and this is the reason why black people have to be put in prison. And it doesn't matter how many black people are in prison. It's not that many, you see. The black people are trying to make it sound like they're all being locked up wholesale. It's not that many. It's not that many. And if they claim that they're being killed, well, it's not that many. And if it is that many, well, they deserve it. It's kind of like our old pal Ben Shapiro, though his initials are correct, BS. He always has the same 3 talking points whenever he's spewing his anti-black garbage. There is no racism. And if that lie doesn't wash, he retreats to the second talking point. Well, there's racism, but it's not that bad. And if that talking point doesn't wash, well, okay, it is that bad, but it's all the Democrats' fault. And it's black people's fault, too. The media has been complicit in what you saw yesterday. They encouraged and emboldened the white supremacists. Because every time you look at a black person being murdered by some white supremacist, it was always about the reporting on the black person as if they were the perpetrator. That's a steady drumbeat of justification. They knew that every black person murdered by the police was an intentional act of murder, and they smeared and vilified the victims, something that they never do with the bad guys. Oh, they didn't run Dylan Roof through the let's look under his fingernails for any dirt ringer. Oh, the Proud Boys. Can you tell me of any Proud Boys criminal records? Can you tell me of any of them at all? Any attempt to try to find out if they have any? No, they didn't make it a point to demonize these white supremacist terrorist groups. That's deliberate. The white media has acted as a propaganda mill for white supremacist dogma. They encouraged these bastards. They made it clear that there was a blatant double standard and that they were going to be using this as a way to glorify white supremacist killings of black people instead of actually taking them on and challenging them. They protected these white supremacists from any and all criticism. The white supremacists realize that the enforcement arm of white supremacy has been weakened, though, in the last year or so. So that's part of the reason why they're lashing out, panicking. That's fear that you saw yesterday. Hey, we got to go for it. If we don't, we may never have any other chance. Their superior status is not natural, and they know it. It has to be enforced through violence. And that apparatus of violence, the police, are being undermined. So the white supremacists figure, hey, why not go for broke? But no matter how much tough talk may be going on Capitol Hill today, make no mistake. Nothing's going to be done. The problem here, even if you take Donald Trump and throw him in prison today, so the hell what? Trump was not the one who started this. Trump could drop dead tonight and it wouldn't stop it. What would stop it is mass punishment for these white supremacists. That they are surveilled, that they are interfered with, that they are constantly being harassed and harried, that everywhere that they go, they're being watched and they know they're being watched. That they're not being defended or glorified or justified in the media, that instead what's happening is they're having bullseyes painted on them by the media, being told, hey, why is this guy not in prison? But Capitol Hill is not going to be going on a war against white supremacy. Ayanna Pressley or Cori Bush, these clowns are sitting here talking about, we're going to introduce some legislation to see if we can get some of these Republicans expelled because they wanted to challenge the certification of Biden for president. That's political posturing. That's Cori Bush auditioning for a job. She's what did she think that she's going to become DNC chairwoman or something? I mean, does she think that Nancy Pelosi is going to give her some sort of committee chairmanship? She just got to Congress. But, you got the jockeying for position going on, and that's what it is for them. None of them talking about introducing legislation that is going to criminalize all of this white supremacist activity, criminalize being a part of any white supremacist organization. If you're a cop who's part of any white supremacist group, or if you have collaborated with them, if you're in contact with them, we're going to use the all-in laws against the police. Nobody's talking about that. You could easily go after these cops under the RICO statutes. But nobody's going to be talking about that. No legislation like that. Not even the implication of that. Not even the suggestion of it. Oh, yeah. So all this empty posturing about we're going to have some laws introduced and we're going to try to see if we can have some of these Republicans expelled. Well, I got a better idea. While you're busy trying to get the Republicans expelled, and that's fine. I don't give a damn about them. We need to have some legislation that goes after these white supremacists. Now, the reason that none of this is happening is not any Washington gridlock. The refusal to weaponize the law against the white supremacists, that's not gridlock. This is an open, blatant refusal to do anything. Even now, with the white supremacists literally overrunning these DC politicians, you will not see either party come together as a group and declare that they're going to put legislation on the books to declare war on white supremacy. We're going after these white supremacist groups. We're going after any of their well-wishers online. We're going to be making it a point to lock these guys up and give them the hardest time there is. We're going after the police departments that have protected and supported them and participated in terrorist acts with them. There's not going to be any of that. Oh, nobody's saying white supremacy's got to carry harsh penalties. And we got to make sure that we stack the deck in the favor of the prosecutors. So we're going to do just like we did black folks with the so-called war on drugs, which was no war on drugs at all. It was a war on black people. We're going to write laws against white supremacy that are so lopsided in the favor of the prosecutors that as soon as we accuse you of white supremacy in any shape, form, or fashion, you might as well go ahead and take that plea deal and do this little 15 to 25 years. Otherwise, you get life. Nobody's going to be talking like that. No one in law enforcement will admit to what we all saw. We saw the police, the Capitol Hill police, remove the barriers so the white supremacists could come in. Instead, what we're going to get is the same chorus of empty denials, the same lies about we're going to open an investigation. In other words, they're going to try to talk us to death and then slither away. Law enforcement were fully involved in yesterday's terrorist attack, and they will protect their uniformed and non-uniformed allies alike. To be part of a white supremacist organization is no different than being part of Al-Qaeda. It is no different than being part of any other terrorist organization. But no legislation will be coming from any of the squad or any of these other fools grandstanding on Twitter. But understand something. After Trump is gone, this is not going to be going away. This is simply a flare-up that has been caused by forces outside of him. Trump simply gave a voice to it. These guys were simply waiting for somebody who would make them feel really good about it. I told you about these so-called accelerationists, white supremacists who want to bring the country down now because as they see it, they still have just enough numbers where after they topple the country, they will be able to successfully use the chaos in order to put a full-fledged Nazi-style ethno-state in place. I told you about these accelerationists, but if you look at Dylan Roof and if you look at that white guy in Minneapolis who smashed the windows of the AutoZone, and you look at the so-called Christian identity white supremacist movement, if you look at most of these white supremacist terrorist groups and their ideology, you see that there is one consistent theme that runs through most of them. And that is the idea that the country has to be torn down all the way to the ground. The country has to be systematically dismantled so that a new, pure white ethno-state can take its place. Practically all these white supremacist terrorist groups subscribe to the exact same foundational tenet, that they have to all go ahead and accept the fact that America is going to be brought down to nothing, is going to be burned to the ground. In fact, they want to burn it to the ground. As far as they're concerned, the chaos that follows, that's going to make what comes next even easier. They want chaos. They want that because that's the only way that they would be able to usher in their glorious white ethno-state, which would simply be a more vulgar and blatant version of the current ethno-state that we're suffering under now. But that's what's going on here. To them, if the country remains standing, or at least if black people are not being slaughtered in the streets with complete impunity, well, as long as the country remains standing and functional, to them, that's defeat. They're defeated right now, as they see it. On the other hand, if the country collapses, then that would be victory. Now, here's what you need to remember. After Agent Orange is sent packing, there's going to be another candidate who's going to come along, and soon. And he's going to be far worse than Trump, and he'll be smart enough to not be so bellicose with his language. He'll understand the necessity not to be running around shooting off his mouth like Trump, but make no mistake, whoever comes next, he's going to be every bit as venal, corrupt, and anti-black as Trump. A very cultured monster. Trump has primed the pump for whomever his successor is going to be, whoever this next monster is going to be. Trump has primed the pump for him. Now, what is it that your good Democrats like Biden and Harris are going to be doing about that? What is it that your Democrats in Congress are going to be doing about that? If they were really so bothered by what happened yesterday, you would be seeing them getting together and saying, we have to have a war on white supremacy. Yeah, you have no problem with the war on drugs, because that's a war on black people. And the war on terror was actually just, now we're giving ourselves permission to go ramshackle the Middle East and take all their oil and take whatever strategic plots of land we think will be useful to checkmating China and Russia. That's what the war on terror was about. It was, we're putting some new pieces on the global chessboard. But now that circumstances have made it irrefutably clear that there must be a war on white supremacy, now that the very lawmakers who were coddling and pampering and playing footsie with the white supremacists have now become their targets, nobody's calling for a war on white supremacy, not even the black members of Congress. They're hoping that this will all go away because, after all, they've made the devil's bargain that they will abide white supremacy as long as white supremacy gives a few of them some token jobs and go ahead and float them some money to the HBCUs, which they can put in their pockets. Those HBCUs are hideously corrupt. Oh, there's a lot of black folks who will gladly sit on their hands while white supremacy continues to grind us into the dirt as long as they get a couple of payoffs. That's what Negro Jim Clyburn and his fish fries are about. Don't threaten white supremacy's interest and they'll make it worth your while. Well, the bastards don't have the ability to make it worth our while. White supremacy is going to destroy itself. That's part of the reason why you've had a number of people in the black media for the last 10 years we've been telling you, what are you going to do when white supremacy finally collapses? Look what happened yesterday. Does this look like a system that's going to go the distance? You need to accept the reality that you're in because that's the only way that you're going to change it. White supremacy is going to fall, but we need to make sure that we're still around to watch its final collapse. We need to be the cause of its collapse. Because the white supremacists are trying to bring things down so they can come after us. We need to bring the white supremacists down. No one's going to do it for us. In fact, we shouldn't want anyone to do it for us. We have a historical debt the white supremacists owes us, and we intend to collect on that debt and take it out of their behinds. And that should be a glorious thing for all black people. We should all have the strong mission of settling this historic vendetta with white supremacy. We should be proud of that. We should be eager to do that. White supremacy is the greatest evil that the world has ever known. It was conceived in evil, and it was raised through connivance and perpetuated itself through pure violence. And as we can see, it's going to end in utter madness. But our job is to make sure that we're the ones who put it to an end.